Okay, so we're back here to talk a little bit about housing prices. So I think I'm going to refrain from sort of going over to take a look at some data because it kind of switching screens around makes things a little bit messy. But there was very rapid growth of housing prices. There's a huge run up between 1996, 2006 or so. And as I think I mentioned in another video, I bought a house in Florida in 2006, so great timing by me. And that's right as I bought a house. That was about the time that the price collapse started. And in a lot of areas, it was worse than 33%, but I think the national numbers, it was about 1/3 off of the peak. And I think our house lost about 1/3 of its value, which for Florida was actually not that bad. The St. Petersburg, Fort Myers, general Tampa area, I think, was one of the hardest hit. But thinking about other recessions or looking at other recessions, there were drops in housing prices. In fact, many markets are sensitive to national recessions, but these are things on average that are about a 7% drop. Even here in Honolulu, we are somewhat insulated from some of the bigger macroeconomic events simply because of the desirability of property here. And so, we do occasionally have drops during recessions, but yeah, even for Honolulu, this drop starting in about 2006 was probably the biggest ever. So why did this happen, right? What happened here with the housing market? Well, we need to kind of dig in a little bit deeper here to sort of think about what was going on. Well, prices ran up because we had really strong growth in the late 1990s. In fact, we had so much economic growth that we actually reversed the budget. We reversed the national debt because we ran budget surpluses, right? Which is kind of from looking back from current times, that seems quite amazing. So people were doing well. There was a lot of economic growth. We also had very low interest rates. We'll take a look at some data in a minute here. I do want to go take a look at something like, maybe we just look at the Fed funds rate. And during that period, we had relatively low interest rates. In the early 2000s, the Fed actually dropped rates very quickly during the 2001 recession and left them there. And then the last piece, the last ingredient here was we sort of loosened up lending standards in terms of what was required to get a mortgage. The bar was really lowered. And all of these things alone probably wouldn't have caused the financial crisis to be the way that it was. But these were all sort of kindling for the housing bonfire that resulted. But what sort of lit that off? That's kind of the other thing that we need to think about. At the same time, right? So this is yet another. So housing was one ingredient. Housing prices, the run up and the popping of that bubble was one ingredient. Another ingredient here that sort of, these are not independent things necessarily, but another ingredient was this so-called savings glut. And in fact, in 2005, Ben Bernanke, former Fed chair, had a very sort of prescient speech here in 2005 that actually said that the title of the speech was "The Global Saving Glut and the U.S. Current Account Deficit." Right, there was a global savings glut, which came about due to some financial crises that happened. I think 1997 was kind of the year of the Asian financial crisis. It was basically a lot of Southeast Asian economies in particular were borrowing in US dollars, and they were actually net borrowers. And then we had a currency crisis. A lot of these countries suddenly were unable to service their US dollar debt because of what had happened to their currencies. Their currencies had lost significant value against the US dollar. And so I don't want to get into the details of the crisis, but after that crisis, we had a lot of countries, developing countries, were now no longer net borrowers, they were net savers. Okay, so they sort of changed, they were forced by the IMF, and there are also some sort of macroeconomic behavioral changes on the parts of governments and large institutions, where we ended up with more savings. So think about this, and I've pulled out some numbers here, right? They went from, $88 billion borrowers to $205 billion savers. All of this extra savings has to go somewhere. And a lot of that went into the US stock market and into US housing. So that sort of exacerbated some of the already existing effects with relatively low interest rates. So this savings glut, right? If you've got all sorts of people out there willing to save, that is going to encourage lower and lower and lower interest rates. So eventually, that made its way into mortgage markets. And so we have a lot of lenders, right? A lot of savers. Savers are lenders in markets for debt. And that led to additional competition. So, right, we can't compete with low rates, right? We're already getting what we can. Why don't we lower our standards? Why don't we give out more loans, right? We're not getting the rates that are giving us the profits that we had before. Well, why not make more loans at those low rates? And that led to loosening standards. Then, right about the time that Ben Bernanke was making this speech, the Fed was in the process of kind of gradually cranking up interest rates. And so the Fed funds rate going up, right? Fed funds rate was rising. And a lot of rates are tied, right? The prime rate is sort of tied to that. A lot of these teaser rates for mortgages that had been, written a few years previous. This, if you're not familiar with this is an acronym for the adjustable rate mortgage. And that's a mortgage where you get a nice rate for the first 3 years or 5 years or 7 years. I think 3-year ARMs are now somewhat rare. I haven't seen any locally below 5 years. But anyway, an adjustable rate mortgage is a mortgage that has a low rate. In this era, they were these super low teaser rates to get people in the door. And then after 5 years or 3 years or 7 years, after some set time period, you could even get 1-year ARMs. After that set time period, your rate would reset to a higher rate. And so that higher rate is pegged to something like the Fed funds rate or to the prime rate or to 10-year treasuries. And so as those are on the rise, suddenly people's mortgages reset to these higher rates. When that happened, we get an increase in defaults. This idea of subprime, these are low quality loans. These are loans where we're not sure, right? These are a lower probability of the bank getting paid back, of the lender being paid back by the borrower. And so a lot of those defaulted. As they defaulted, those houses went on the market. Those defaulted houses that went into foreclosure, you got a bunch of foreclosures on the market, that pulls the price down. And so we entered kind of a vicious cycle. And that's what caused the burst. Well, that was the bursting of the housing bubble. And so lower prices, more defaults leads to lower prices, leads to more defaults. And that's the cycle. So that's sort of several of the ingredients. I've got one more ingredient here, and I want to spend I want to give this some time to talk about, but I'm at my limit here for a 10-minute video, so I'll leave that for the next one, which is where I will see you soon.